So I've come out here to the Oak Grove Cemetery above Knights Ferry to see if I can find out if there's some historical figures buried here. It's a very old cemetery dating back to the 1850s and 60s. Knights Ferry dates back to 1849, but the town's first dead were buried uphill from the town site. This cemetery, located about a mile or two outside of town on a high plain, was established in the 1850s. So I found the grave of William Lane. Turns out he was part of a posse who tracked down some horse thieves here in this area. The chase went all the way to the coastal range, where on April 21st, 1858, he was murdered. The citizens were pretty upset with the guy. His name was Anderson. He had murdered Mr. Lane, so while he was there in the jail in LaGrange, 61 indignant residents of Knights Ferry traveled overnight, broke into the jail, dragged Mr. Anderson out, and hung him from the tree, all to avenge the death of this man, William Lane. William was the son of Major Thomas Lane, who owned a hotel in Knights Ferry. It was a well-respected and well-known family. So I think I found one of the oldest graves here. Hiram Nelson from Vermont. He died January 10th, 1854. He was only 28. It's the grave of Thomas Tulloch, who died in 1855 at the age of 46. It was said that Knights Ferry built its first school in 1854 to educate the children of the Lane, McGee, and Dent families. It was in half of the stables near what is now the Knights Ferry Resort. One of the Lane children reported that it wasn't safe to be near the partition because a horse once kicked the wall and injured a student. The original schoolhouse burned in 1899 and was rebuilt as this one. This structure was later dropped one floor, and its demise was in 1971 when it caught on fire. And there's a reminder of how short people lived back then. John G. Parker died in 1903 at the age of 41. This was a German immigrant who was born in 1850 and died in 1875. He was just 25 years of age. Teresa Fitzhugh died 1894, native of Sweden. Just seeing all these tombstones with foreign names and foreign languages just makes you realize how important immigrants were to the founding of the country. They played a very important role, all seeking a better life here in the United States, such as this tombstone right here, which is written entirely in German. It looks like the guy was born in Hanover, Germany, 1835. He died in 1863. That was when Abraham Lincoln was president. This has to be one of the oldest cemeteries in Stanislaus County. Here lies Elizabeth, wife of William, looks like Gobin, died at the age of 37 on April 29th, 1862. Wow. I found the grave of the Pentland brothers, who were key vineyard owners in the area. They also own part interest in one of the ditches here in LaGrange. Their names were Tom, Dick, and Harry. I'm not making this up. It's an urn draped in some fabric, probably made out of stone. So this is a grave of Osmond Drew. He was one of the original owners of the Knights Ferry General Store. He was one of the partners with Mr. Moulton in the Knights Ferry General Store, the one that's still operating since 1852. There he is, he's buried right there. In the back of the cemetery, I found the grave of George Grayson, died in 1876. It looks like 13 years of age. Let's see what we got here. Teresa Grayson, mother Mary Grayson, 1903, and D.F. Grayson, 1906. The Graysons operated a hotel in Knights Ferry called the Grayson Hotel. Not to be confused with Grayson, California, which is in the same county. Look at all those Easter lilies and roses. Looks like he was a Mason as well. Mr. Johnson died in 1866. Crazy old. John Boehm was a Mason. Some illness must have been going on in the fall of 1865 because he passed away October 26th, and his son Willie, 17 months old, died a month prior. You could almost spend all day out here trying to research all the historical people who lived here. William Wilson, native of Philadelphia, died in the 1860s at the age of 26. So many people died at such a young age that today they could have entered a hospital and doctors could have saved them from whatever ailed them. Looks like this gentleman was one of the more fortunate ones. He died at the age of 83. Charles Henry Fitch, born in 1806, died in 1889. 1885, native of New Hampshire. Sarah Ann Dunlop, died 1882, 48, native of Missouri. Gone but not forgotten. Here's a very old grave, that of N.A. Reddington, who was born in 1807 and died in 1867. Knocked off its pedestal. And this marker indicates J.F. Rutherford died in Knights Ferry in 1869, and that he was also born in Waddington in St. Lawrence County, New York. This is Mary, wife of Captain Thomas Dennis, born in London, 1805, died in 1866. She died as she lived peaceably and calmly in a strange land in the arms of a stranger. Angels will caress the tears of those true friends, for she had some that loved her for her real worth. It's always sad to see a tombstone knocked off its pedestal. This one is of William Heath, who died in 1871. I found a Civil War era grave. This one is William Studevant, who was of Company B, the 57th Illinois Infantry. This may be the most puzzling grave here. James Horsley was born in London, England, January 10th, 1790, and he died in Delphi, Indiana, June 21st, 1847. I can only speculate that they brought his body out here to California to be buried. Here in the corner of the cemetery is a Klein who died in 1868. He lived only 11 months and 27 days, but his grave and this iron fence have been here for over 152 years. The inscription says he rests in heaven. Some aspects of the cemetery are in disrepair, such as this obelisk fell. It belongs to the Tulloch family, who played an important role in Knights Ferry history. This is the grave of David Tulloch, one of the few Tulloch family members to be buried here. This is him as a student in 1895 at the school in Buena Vista, just across the river from Knights Ferry. He may have been the son of Charles Tulloch, who owned the flour mill and later converted it to a power mill in 1900. There's a grave behind me that's not historical in the true sense of history, but it's a significant grave because he was the victim of a homicide. This is the grave of Mark Ulrich, born in 1949. He was killed June 20th, 1967 by a criminal by the name of William Archie Fain. Oakdale High School students had gathered in a park to sign yearbooks that evening, and a party moved to the outskirts of town. Mark Ulrich was driving two female classmates back to town when a car pulled up behind Ulrich, flashing its headlights. Mark thought he knew who it was and pulled over in the Valley Home area. It was Fain who shot Ulrich to death with a shotgun, left his body in this road. Then he raped both girls. When Fain was up for parole, the community protested, and twice his release was delayed until 1983 when he was freed from prison. I believe he was a peeping Tom. But he also has passed away as well. Just a despicable human being. Mark is buried here next to his parents, Lucille and Alan, and his sister, Patricia. So I'm a little disappointed that I didn't find all the graves that I wanted to find. There's no cemetery office to check in where the location of specific graves are. Now, I didn't find the grave of Dr. James Lowe, who was the town doctor. He was born in Louisiana in 1836 and died in Knights Ferry in 1900. I also did not find the grave of Nihilus Lowe, who was buried here in 1959. But what is interesting is that his daughter was Eileen Lowe. She grew up and married a world-famous man named Giulio Gallo. He and his brother Ernest started Gallo Winery of Modesto. I also had searched for the grave of Tom Prouse, the legendary Knights Ferry resident who lived until the 1970s. The same gentleman seen here posing on the famous landmark around here called Lover's Leap. Curiously, during the making of this episode, I learned that there were plans about a century ago to build a concrete memorial atop the same rock. The intent was to memorialize Stanley Collins, who was a Knights Ferry serviceman who in 1918 was killed with 209 others when the Germans torpedoed the transit ship Tuscania in the Irish Sea north of Belfast. For some reason, this monument was never constructed. I also couldn't find the grave of teacher John Wilms, who was pictured here in the 1890s. He taught at the little school just south of the river at a town called Buena Vista. What did it take to get you out of the car since you didn't go in the cemetery? It's a zonkey?
It's a zonkey.
What are zonkies?
It's a zebra and a donkey. It's a zonkey.
He's got spots on his legs.
Come here, zonkey.
He's been out here for a couple of years. He wants a bite of my camera. No, stick your nose back in.
Hey, look at these eyelashes.
Donkey says that's what you get for not being interested in history.
I'm interested in zonkies. Hi, zonkey.
Oh, he's gonna bite you.
I know.
Don't do it.
Don't. You're funny. It's scary because he's gonna bite me.
He very well could. It's always nice to end when Sarah gets to see or touch an animal, because history is not everything.